My badge still said Maya Hart, RN, like that meant anything in a place where nurses were treated like extra hands instead of actual human beings. I was halfway to the locker room, one hand already tugging at the knot of my ponytail, when our charge nurse stepped into my path like a door that knew how to talk. Her eyes flicked to the wall clock, then back to me, like the time belonged to her. In my head, I was already home. I could already see Lily curled under her rainbow blanket, her little knees tucked up, the way she always tried to act brave when she didn't feel good. I could already smell the cheap chicken soup Mrs. June Parker made whenever she heard my kids so much as sniffle. Mrs. June was 67, and built out of pure stubborn kindness. The kind of neighbor who didn't just watch my daughter, she loved her like family. And then my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Mrs. June's name, and my stomach dropped before I even read it. I didn't need words to know what it meant. Lily had been warm when I kissed her forehead that morning. I'd told myself it was nothing. Kids ran hot. Kids got little colds. Single moms learned to lie to themselves so they could keep moving. But Mrs. June's message said Lily's fever had climbed, that she'd given her children's medicine, that Lily kept asking when I was coming home. It wasn't dramatic. It was practical. It was the kind of calm update that only made the guilt sharper, because it reminded me that my life had become a series of emergencies I wasn't allowed to treat like emergencies. I stared at the phone too long. Behind me, a monitor alarmed in its high, insistent rhythm. Somewhere down the hall, someone called for respiratory. A cart rattled over the uneven tile, and the fluorescent lights above us buzzed like they were angry about having to stay on, too. I swallowed hard, shoved the phone back in my pocket, and tried to step around the charge nurse. That's when she used the words that always worked. Staffing needs, team player, short-staffed again. And the quiet little threat that if I left, it would be noted. I didn't hear a direct promise of punishment, but I felt it in the way her gaze held mine for an extra beat. Like she was daring me to choose my child over the schedule. The injustice of it sat hot in my chest. Not because I thought I was special, because I knew I wasn't. The ER didn't stop because Lily had a fever. It didn't stop because my feet were throbbing inside my sneakers. It didn't stop because I'd been up for 16 hours and my lower back felt like it was made of cracked glass. The ER only cared that bodies kept coming and the machine kept running, and nurses like me were the gears that got replaced without anyone noticing. So I did what I always did. I nodded. I swallowed my pride. I put my own life back in my pocket like it was something small enough to forget, and I went back in. The Queen's ER at night had its own weather. The air was cold and dry with antiseptic, old coffee, and that faint metallic hint that clung to places where people waited for news. The chairs in the waiting area were that awful molded plastic that never warmed up, no matter how long you sat. The TV in the corner was muted, captions crawling across a bright screen no one was watching. Babies cried. Someone coughed wetly into a sleeve. A man in a torn hoodie argued with the vending machine like it had personally betrayed him. I moved through it like a ghost in wrinkled scrubs, my shoulders rounded from habit. Nurses learned quickly how to take up less space, how to slide around egos, how to do life-saving work while being treated like background noise. My hands trembled when I opened a supply drawer, not from fear, from hunger. I couldn't remember the last real meal I'd had, just half a granola bar, a gulp of lukewarm water, and a few sips of coffee that had long since gone bitter. My stomach cramped, and I ignored it. Ignoring pain was a skill. I'd been practicing it my whole life. The overhead speaker crackled with another announcement, the voice flat and practiced like it belonged to a robot. Stretchers rolled past, shoes squeaked, gloves snapped. The rhythm of the place was relentless, and the worst part was how normal it felt. I told myself I was doing it for Lily. That was the story I repeated when my knees ached and my eyes burned. When I missed school pickups, when I forgot to buy more cereal, when I watched other parents at the park on my rare day off and felt like I was peeking into a life I didn't deserve. But there was another truth under that truth. Part of me kept running because stopping meant feeling everything. The exhaustion. The loneliness. The quiet fear that if I wasn't useful, if I wasn't needed, I might disappear completely. I caught a glimpse of myself in a dark window, hair escaping my bun, coffee stain on my scrub top, circles under my eyes. 28 years old and already tired in my bones. I looked like a woman who held other people's lives together while her own frayed at the edges. I slipped into the waiting area for one shallow breath, pretending I was checking charts, pretending I wasn't just trying not to sway. I pressed 2 fingers to my wrist, counting my pulse like it was someone else's. Fast, too fast. My body was sending warnings I didn't have time to read. Then the ambulance bay doors slammed open. The sound cut through everything, the beeping, the chatter, the constant motion like a hand snapping in a crowded room. A gust of colder air rushed in, carrying the sharp bite of outside night, and something else. Expensive cologne, dark and woody, clean in a way that didn't belong here. It sliced through the antiseptic haze like a blade through fog, and my head lifted before I could stop it. My instincts rose, prickling along my skin. He walked in like he owned the air. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit so perfectly tailored it looked unreal under fluorescent lights. His hair was dark, neat, and his face had the kind of structure that made you think of old money and newer violence, even if you'd never met a violent man up close. 2 men flanked him, heavy through the shoulders, silent the way trained people were silent. Their eyes didn't linger on the sick or the scared. They scanned corners, exits, shadows. They moved like the ER was a territory that needed to be assessed. The man in the center didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He didn't belong, and somehow that made everyone else feel like they were the ones out of place. Even from where I stood, half hidden behind a counter, I could feel the waiting room shift. Conversations faltered. A crying toddler went quiet for a second, like even a child could sense danger the way animals did. My own breath caught. I told myself to look away, to go back to work, to remember Lily's fever and the way Mrs. June would be rocking her right now, humming softly, trying to fill the gap I kept leaving. But my eyes stayed on him, because the moment he stepped fully into the light, I understood something without knowing why. This wasn't just a stranger walking into the Queen's ER. This was a storm wearing a suit. And the scariest part was the way my exhausted, lonely heart reacted like it had been waiting for the room to change, like it couldn't help but listen when danger entered and made everything else go silent. The waiting room didn't get quieter because someone asked it to. It got quieter because everyone felt it. The man in the charcoal suit moved like he'd never once had to apologize for taking up space. He didn't hurry, but he also didn't hesitate. His shoes didn't squeak on the tile the way ours did. Even his stillness had weight to it, like a decision. And the men with him there were at least too close. Maybe more drifting at the edges, didn't look like family members worried about a loved one. They looked like a perimeter. Their eyes kept sliding to exits, corners, reflective surfaces. One of them briefly checked the hallway that led toward triage, the way you'd check a street before crossing. Their hands hovered near their jackets without making a show of it, and my nurse brain, trained on patterns, filed it away with a tight little pulse of unease. My first instinct was the oldest one I had. Don't be seen. Invisibility had saved me more times than I could count. It saved you from being picked on in school. It saved you from getting extra work piled on your plate at the hospital. It saved you from being the target of someone's bad day. It was a shield made out of silence. So I tried to put my head down and get back to my job. I turned toward the nurse's station, forced my feet to move, forced my face into that neutral expression we all wore like armor. The alarms kept chirping. A kid in pediatrics kept crying in those exhausted little sobs that sounded like hiccups. A man in the corner muttered to himself, rocking slightly, his eyes wide and unfocused. Normal. This was normal, except it wasn't. Not with him there. I felt him before I saw him again, which sounded ridiculous, but it was true. The expensive cologne cut through the bleach and antiseptic like someone opened a different door to a different world. Dark, clean, too intentional for a place where everything smelled like survival. The scent wrapped around my senses and made my stomach twist, partly because it didn't belong and partly because my body was so tired it reacted to anything that felt sharp and alive. I pretended to check a chart. My hands were steady in the way they'd learned to be steady even when I wasn't. But inside, something kept pulling my attention back. It wasn't just his suit. It wasn't just the guards. It was the way the room adjusted around him like gravity had shifted. People watched without meaning to. Even the receptionist seemed smaller, and then my own body decided it was done listening to my lies. I'd been pushing for so long that I'd stopped noticing the signs. Hunger wasn't hunger anymore, it was a dull ache I carried like a second badge. Sleep deprivation wasn't sleep deprivation, it was just the way my eyes burned all the time. Stress wasn't stress, it was the air I breathed. But standing there, caught between my responsibility and a stranger who felt like danger wrapped in calm, the dam cracked. My vision pinched at the edges. The bright ER lights smeared into a halo. The sound of the monitors grew distant, like someone was turning a dial down. My tongue felt thick in my mouth. I swallowed and tasted old coffee and nothing else. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, and I didn't even need to look to know it was Mrs. June with another update about Lily. My chest tightened so fast it hurt. Lily with her flushed cheeks. Lily trying not to cry because she didn't want to bother me. Lily asking for her mom. The shame hit me hard and sudden. The shame of being here. The shame of not being two places at once. The shame of needing anything from anyone when my kid needed me. I took a step. The floor shifted. Or maybe I did. A cold wave rolled up from my stomach to my throat. I reached for the counter, but my fingers missed by an inch. That inch felt like a mile. And then there were arms around me. Not a grab, not a yank, a catch. It happened so fast my brain couldn't keep up. Like my body fell and someone decided it wasn't allowed to hit the ground. I felt strength under my ribs, steady pressure at my elbow, a firm hold that didn't bruise and didn't hesitate. My cheek brushed against something smooth, fine fabric, expensive, absurdly clean in this place. His cologne surrounded me, mixed with the faintest hint of something sharper underneath, like cold air after and beneath it all, there was warmth, human warmth, the kind I didn't realize I'd been starving for until it was pressed against me. For a second, my entire life narrowed to that contact. I wasn't thinking about patient ratios or overtime. I wasn't thinking about the charge nurse and her threats. I wasn't even thinking about the story I'd read online 100 times about men like this, men you didn't touch and didn't trust. I was thinking about how I couldn't remember the last time someone held me like they meant it. That thought terrified me more than the guards did, because it cracked something open. I clung without permission, without planning, without dignity. My hands found his shoulders like they belonged there, and I hated myself for it even as relief flooded my chest so hard I nearly sobbed. I didn't ask out loud. I couldn't, but inside, it was a confession whispered straight into the part of me that had been lonely for too long. Just a second, please. Just 1 second where I don't have to be strong. His body went still, not stiff with disgust, not startled the way most people would be if a stranger grabbed them in a hospital waiting room, still like a decision being made. I felt the guards tighten around us. I felt eyes on my back. I felt the whole room holding its breath again. But now it wasn't about his arrival. It was about his choice. His arms settled around me with careful control, as if he understood exactly how fragile I was in that moment. One hand braced my lower back like he was anchoring me to the earth. The other came up near my head, not grabbing, not forcing, just there, steady, protective, like he was holding space for me to fall apart without consequence. I didn't deserve it. That's what my brain kept chanting. I didn't earn it. I didn't ask properly. I didn't even know him. But my body didn't care about deserving. My body only knew it felt safe for the first time in what felt like years. And that safety was so foreign it made my throat burn. I thought of Lily again, her small hand in mine when we crossed the street, the way she trusted me completely. The fear snapped through me like a live wire. What was I doing? Who was this? What if this was the moment I made a mistake that followed me home? And still, he didn't treat me like I was disposable. He held me like I was real, not Nurse #7, not a tired woman in stained scrubs, not a single mom who couldn't get ahead. A person. When I finally forced my hands to let go, my knees were still weak. My face was hot with embarrassment. I stared down at the floor like it could swallow me, but even without looking up, I could feel his attention on me steady, assessing, almost unbearably focused, like he'd noticed me in a way people didn't, like he'd filed me away as something that mattered. Someone called my name from the hallway, urgent and sharp, and the ER snapped back to life around me. I stepped away because I had to, because patients were waiting, because Lily was waiting, because my whole world was built on moving, even when I was breaking. I walked back into the noise with my heart hammering and my skin still humming where his hands had been. And no matter how hard I tried to shove it down and get through the shift, one truth kept stalking me through every beep and every overhead page. I needed to know who he was because my body already knew I wouldn't forget the way he looked at me. I tried to file him away as a night shift glitch, a suit in a queen's ER, a stranger's arm stopping my knees from hitting tile, a warmth that didn't belong under fluorescent lights. The ER didn't let me keep it. A trauma page pulled me back into motion, and my body obeyed. The checklist in my head ran on autopilot, while another part of me replayed one detail. His hold was steady, careful, like I was breakable and worth the trouble. His cologne stayed in my senses, dark and expensive against antiseptic. I told myself it was exhaustion, until my fingers found the business card in my pocket, and my pulse jumped. Damian Moretti. I remembered heavy paper and embossed letters, the confidence of someone who expects to be called back. The name sounded like it belonged to a different city than mine. Hours blurred. I started IVs, calmed panicked families, and kept moving even when my stomach cramped. My phone stayed quiet, and that scared me. Mrs. June usually updated me about Lily. Silence meant Lily was finally asleep. Or Lily was worse and she didn't want to scare me while I worked. At 3:12 a.m., the hallway noise dipped just enough for a stolen break. The break room was a humming vending machine, stale coffee, and harsh light. My hands shook as I poured a cup I didn't want, just to have something warm. I told myself I was checking messages. My thumb opened a search bar instead. My cracked screen lit my face pale. I typed his name slowly, as if spelling it out could summon consequences. The results weren't normal. No polished bio, no harmless charity photo, just headlines and threads written in that careful, sideways language people use when they're talking about someone powerful. I scrolled, and my stomach sank. Damian Moretti, connected to shipping interests around the Brooklyn docks, rumored to settle disputes that never reached court, a name that floated up with missing cargo, suddenly quiet union fights, politicians smiling too wide at fundraisers. Nothing I could prove, but the same word kept repeating like a warning. Untouchable. For a moment I tried to convince myself it was all internet theater. People stitching rumors into a villain because it felt safer than admitting how the city really works. I clicked through article after article, watching the same photo repeat. A man in a suit stepping out of dark cars, never looking rushed, never looking scared. My stomach rolled. I set the phone down and breathed through the nausea like I was coaching a patient through pain. All I could think was Lily's school badge clipped to her backpack, her teacher's name written in marker, the tiny routines that kept her safe. If Damian Moretti was real danger, then my hug wasn't just embarrassing, it was reckless. I imagined explaining it to Mrs. June, to a social worker, to myself in the mirror, and my throat tightened with panic. I cleared my browser history fast anyway, like deleting a trail could erase what I'd learned. My mouth went dry. I stared at the break room door like it might open and he'd be there, watching me learn the truth. It stayed shut. The fluorescent light buzzed. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped steadily, uncaring. All I could see was Lily. 6 years old, brave in the way kids get brave when they have no choice. I pictured her flushed cheeks and the way she tucked her stuffed rabbit under her chin when she didn't feel good. I imagined someone asking about her at school. A car I didn't recognize idling near our curb, and my fear turned cold and absolute. Then the shame followed, sharp and unwanted, because part of me still remembered those few seconds of safety. I didn't want to admit how badly I'd needed comfort, how easily I'd taken it from a stranger. The smart move was obvious. Throw away the card, block any number, go back to my small life, and keep my kid far from whatever darkness his name carried. I stared until my eyes burned, then shoved the phone into my pocket like I could bury the knowledge with it. The shift crawled. I charted, pushed meds, answered call lights, and pretended my insides weren't vibrating. When I finally clocked out at 6:05 a.m., dawn softened the sky into washed-out pink over Queens. I walked into the parking garage with my bag cutting into my shoulder, the concrete air cold in my lungs, my Civic waiting like a tired friend. My phone buzzed before I reached the driver's door. Unknown number. For one wild second, I hoped it was Mrs. June. Then the message appeared, calm and exact. It checked whether I had eaten, like my empty stomach was a problem someone had already decided to solve, and it told me to stay right there on level 3, like my location had never been private. I stood between concrete pillars, staring at my car, heart hammering, knowing a black SUV could appear at any second. Dawn leaked into the hospital parking garage like watercolor, turning the concrete pillars pale pink and bruised gray. My shoes squeaked as I crossed level 3, bag cutting into my shoulder, stomach hollow enough to ache. The unknown number had buzzed again, a calm insistence that I stay put, that I answer, that I admit I had not eaten. I stood beside my battered Civic and listened to the echo of distant sirens and the softer hum of the city waking. Exhaustion settled on me heavier than my scrubs. In my pocket, my phone felt like it carried a warning. My first impulse was to drive straight home, grab Lily, and pretend this night never happened. My second impulse was to call Mrs. June and ask her to keep the doors locked. Neither impulse fixed the fact that Damian Moretti already knew where I was. I had Googled him, seen the doc rumors, the careful articles that said everything without saying anything. I could call security. I could call the police. I could run. But running on empty has a way of turning into collapse. And collapse is what my daughter cannot afford. I forced my hands to stop shaking. A soft engine note rolled through the garage, too smooth for this grim place. A black SUV glided around the corner, tinted windows swallowing the sunrise, tires whispering instead of rattling. It stopped beside my Civic with the precision of a decision already made. Two men stepped out first, scanning the rows, the stairwell, the shadows between pillars. They were not in scrubs, not in uniforms, yet they moved with practiced authority. My throat tightened. I was suddenly aware of every camera, every blind spot, every way a person could disappear inside a concrete maze. I backed up, instinctively anyway. Then he emerged from the rear door, and the air changed the way it had in the ER. Damian wore a dark suit that looked untouched by night shift chaos, hair neat, jaw shadowed like he had been awake for hours but never unraveled. The cologne hit me again, that expensive scent cutting through oil and concrete dust. His gaze landed on me and held, not leering, not dismissive, just sharp and steady, like he was taking my measurements for something I had not agreed to. My pulse hammered in my ears. I hated that I did not look away. One of the men angled his body so the open garage felt suddenly smaller, and the SUV door opened wider, inviting without warmth. I could see leather the color of midnight, a clean cabin that smelled like money and control. A privacy screen separated the driver, turning the back seat into its own sealed world. Damian did not gesture like a salesman. He simply waited, as if my choice mattered. But time did not. In my head, I listed options like medication doses, refuse, call someone, get in. I thought of Lily's flushed cheeks and Mrs. June alone with her. I stepped in because standing still felt worse than risk. The door closed with a heavy, cushioned thunk that sounded final. The city noise faded, replaced by ventilation and the click of someone checking locks. I realized I had not buckled my seatbelt. My fingers fumbled for the strap, clumsy with fatigue and adrenaline. Damian leaned in, not rushing, and his hands covered mine with certainty. He guided the belt across my chest and clicked it home. The gesture was small, almost domestic, but it carried an unmistakable message. I was in his space now, and he would decide next. My phone lit up in my lap, and the name on the screen made my throat close. Mrs. June wrote that Lily's fever had climbed again, that she kept asking for me, that she had finally dozed off but woke crying. I stared until the letters blurred. The shame came first, because I was not there. The fear came second, because I was here. I imagined explaining this car, this man, this decision, to my daughter someday, and my stomach twisted hard. Still, I knew going home wrecked would not help Lily. The SUV began to roll into morning traffic. Through the tinted glass, Queens looked unreal, softened by sunrise and distance. Delivery trucks and commuters moved like a species, steady and ordinary. I wondered what they would think if they knew I was sitting in a bulletproof-looking cocoon with a man the internet called Untouchable. My body wanted food, but deeper than that, it wanted rest. Wanted someone to say I was not failing. I hated that he had offered exactly what I needed without being asked. It felt like rescue, and it felt like a trap. I pressed my palms together, telling myself this was for Lily. Leaving the hospital felt like walking off a ledge. Relief came first, because the car was warm and I could stop bracing my knees. Fear came next, because I was accepting warmth from the wrong kind of man. I watched streetlights slide over the tinted glass and counted turns, building an escape map in my head. Damian sat near me, silent, steady, as if doubt was something other people carried. The SUV veered off the main road into a private drive. A gate opened before we stopped, and we descended into an underground garage. The line behind me was gone. An unmarked ramp pulled us under the building, away from the street noise, into a garage that smelled like clean concrete instead of exhaust. The SUV rolled past a gate that opened before we slowed, as if someone had been waiting for the exact second we arrived. Men in dark coats watched from the corners, not staring, just registering. A camera followed us with quiet patience. My worn sneakers felt wrong on the polished floor when I stepped out. I kept thinking about my Civic, about Queens, about Lily's fever, and how far away home suddenly felt to me alone. Damian guided me to an elevator that did not have buttons for ordinary floors. A key card slid, a light blinked, and the doors accepted us with a soft sigh. Inside, the walls were brushed steel in silence. I caught my reflection beside him. He looked carved and certain. I looked like a crumpled nurse holding herself together by habit. The elevator opened straight into a space of glass and shadow. The skyline filled the windows. New York spread out like a postcard I was not meant to touch. Lake-like water, bridges, sun, and a calm that felt unreal. The kitchen gleamed with marble and stainless steel, but it was the small sounds that stunned me. The click of a burner, the soft scrape of a pan, the calm rhythm of someone who knew what he was doing. Damian rolled his sleeves like he did not need permission in any room on earth. He set out eggs, bread, a small jar of strawberry jam, and a pot already breathing coffee into the air. I stood by the island, hands tucked under my arms, trying to decide if I was safer being skeptical or being grateful for what came next. When the plate landed in front of me, my body answered before my pride could speak. I ate fast, then slowed, embarrassed by the hunger that made me forget manners. The food was simple, hot, and real, like someone had remembered my basic needs mattered. I felt my shoulders drop a fraction with every bite. In the ER, I lived on alarms and adrenaline. Here there was only the distant city and the steady presence across the counter. I kept telling myself not to trust comfort that arrived with bodyguards, yet my eyes kept stinging anyway, like tears were waiting. I had learned to be small long before nursing taught me to hustle. After my mom died, the foster homes blurred together. One family that wanted the check, another that collected kids like furniture, another where I slept with my door wedged shut. I trained myself to listen for footsteps, to read moods, to disappear. By 18, I aged out with a trash bag of clothes and the kind of determination that feels like spite. Nursing school was scholarships and shifts and never asking for help, because help always had a price. That rule had kept me alive until now. Then Lily arrived, 6 pounds of fierce life, and the rules changed. Her father disappeared before she learned to say his name, leaving me with daycare receipts and bedtime stories and the constant math of rent versus groceries. I worked nights so I could pretend I was present in the mornings. Mrs. June became my miracle, walking Lily to school, packing soup, never judging my eyes. Every choice I made ran through one question: will this keep my child safe? Sitting in this luxury, I felt that question burn hotter. Who was Damian? And what did he want from us? Damian's attention never felt casual. He moved around me like he was making sure I did not tip over again, and somehow that made me want to argue. I told myself I should leave, that I should get home to Lily, yet my limbs felt filled with sand. A hallway opened onto a bedroom bigger than my apartment, the bed dressed in dark linens, the windows hidden behind blackout curtains. The promise of darkness hit me like mercy. I agreed to rest for hours, and hated myself for the relief. My eyes closed before the thought of resistance could form. I slept hard, the kind of sleep that feels like falling through floors. No dreams, just darkness and a heaviness that stitched my body back together. When I woke, it was 4:40 p.m., and for a moment I did not know where I was. The room was too quiet, the sheets too soft, the air cool and clean. My phone sat on the nightstand, and I grabbed it like a lifeline, thinking of Lily. In the distance, I heard low voices and the clink of glass. Someone was awake out there besides me, and my heart started counting exits. I sat up and realized I was wearing a shirt that was not mine, soft cotton that smelled faintly of his cologne. My scrubs were not on the floor where I had dropped them. They were folded on a chair, clean, pressed, and still warm in the way freshly dried clothes feel. My stomach flipped. Someone had come into this room while I slept. That should have terrified me. Instead, an embarrassing tenderness spread under my ribs because the act was so practical, so careful. I held the folded fabric and listened. Footsteps moved beyond the door, steady and guarded. At 4:40 p.m., I woke tangled in charcoal sheets, blinking at a ceiling that didn't feel real. The room smelled faintly of detergent and expensive cologne, a mix that made my stomach flip. My scrubs weren't on the floor where I'd kicked them off. They sat on a chair, washed, folded, and warm, like someone had cared for me while I was unconscious. My first reaction should have been panic. Instead, I felt a soft, dangerous relief, and then anger snapped in behind it. Someone had crossed my door. I held the fabric to my face, listening for movement. The penthouse beyond the bedroom felt different than before, tighter, awake. Low voices drifted from the main room, and when I cracked the door, I saw men I hadn't seen that morning. They weren't loud, but they occupied space like trained shadows, scanning corners, checking windows, watching each other. One of them noticed me and dipped his head with careful respect, as if my name already belonged on their list. I suddenly felt underdressed in Damian's shirt, barefoot on polished stone. My phone showed no new updates from Mrs. June, and that silence made my chest ache for Lily too. I followed the sound to the terrace and found Damian near the glass, phone at his ear, posture carved from control. Even without hearing the words, I recognized the tone in his face. Cold negotiation, a man used to being obeyed. When he noticed me, something shifted, the hardness easing into focus that landed on me like a hand. I didn't thank him for the laundry. I didn't smile. I stood there with my scrubs folded against my chest and let my anger speak through my silence. I needed him to understand that care without consent felt like a threat. He moved closer, and I could feel the room behind me hold its breath. He didn't deny what he'd done. Instead, he laid out facts with the same calm he used for everything. My address, my lease, the months I'd been juggling late fees, the notice I hadn't opened yet because I was always running. Eviction paperwork had been filed the day before, sitting somewhere I hadn't had time to see. The humiliation hit first, hot and sharp. Then the fear followed, because if he knew that much, he could know where Lily slept too. And that was unbearable already. He didn't argue. He opened his phone and let the numbers speak. A transfer confirmation showed my student loans wiped out, the total that had haunted me since graduation, $147,000. Another screen showed my rent brought current, late fees cleared, a note that eviction proceedings were withdrawn. A third message confirmed my Civic was scheduled for service and would be returned fully repaired. Then he mentioned Lily. Practical details only someone who'd looked too closely would know. Fever medicine, groceries, Mrs. June's address for delivery. My throat closed. Relief tried to rise, and I fought it like it was poison. I wanted to explode, to demand my privacy back, to insist I could drown on my own. Instead, my hands shook and my eyes burned. Tears came anyway, humiliating and honest, because the weight had shifted before I could brace for it. I pictured Lily's school papers on our chipped kitchen table, the emergency contact always being Mrs. June because I had no family to list. I pictured unpaid bills hidden under coupons. Damian's help felt like oxygen. It also felt like ownership. I stood in both feelings, furious and grateful, and could not separate them, not anymore, not tonight. The worst part was how final it already was. Money had moved, balances were zero, records updated, and my independence suddenly felt like a story I used to tell myself. In his world, decisions were made, and then reality bent to match. I looked at my clean scrubs and understood the pattern. He didn't ask permission. He replaced problems with solutions. For Lily, that mattered. For me, it was terrifying. I kept waiting to feel safe, and instead I felt claimed, like my life had been rewritten while I slept. Every gift felt like a bill I couldn't read yet. His focus sharpened again, not on my tears but on the threat behind them. He made it clear I would not return to my apartment tonight. Someone had been asking questions, circling my name, my building, my routine. It wasn't dramatic, but it chilled me more than sirens. He framed it as protection, not punishment, and I hated that the distinction soothed me. A driver would take me where I needed to go, and men would wait close. My first thought was Lily, and the panic of strangers mapping her world. I couldn't tell if I was safer or trapped. Mrs. June finally texted. Lily was sick but sleeping. Soup waiting, doors locked, relief hit, and guilt right behind it. I would return to the hospital tonight because Lily needed a mother who kept her job in her head. But now my path came with drivers and eyes, like I'd stepped onto a stage with spotlights. I pulled on my scrubs and felt grateful and exposed. The ER had been the first crack. This was the break, the moment I accepted Damian's help. I became worth tracking. And if someone was tracking me, Lily was too. That scared me most. By the time my next shift rolled around, the driver was already waiting on level 3 like a metronome. I walked out of my building in Queens with my lunch bag out of habit, then remembered I did not have lunch anymore, at least not the kind I packed. The SUV swallowed me in quiet leather, and the city blurred by behind tinted glass. I arrived at the employee entrance too early, too clean, too fed. That should have felt like a win. Instead, it felt like proof I was being handled. Inside, the ER was the same fluorescent storm. Monitors chirped, stretchers rattled, and the waiting room smelled of bleach, sweat, and old fear. I threw myself into triage and let muscle memory take over. The difference was my body did not wobble. My hands were steadier, my head clearer. People noticed. A few nurses gave me quick looks that said I seemed almost human. I hated that it was true. Tasha Green found me at the med cart, grinning the way she always did when she sensed gossip without needing words. She was the kind of friend who could turn a code blue night into a shared eye roll and still chart like her life depended on it. I could practically hear what she would say about my glow, my posture, my sudden ability to blink without pain. Her teasing lived in my head like a life raft, because it reminded me I was still Maya, not a project. Every time I reached for my phone, it was already vibrating with another check-in, another reminder to eat, another note relayed through the driver who waited in the garage like a shadow. If I skipped a break, someone seemed to know. If I stayed late to help a new nurse, the SUV was still there, engine humming, patient as a leash. I told myself it was kindness. I told myself it was safety. Then I caught myself adjusting my pace to match someone else's schedule. Mid-shift, when the trauma bays were packed and my stomach started chewing on itself, a delivery bag appeared at the nurse's station with my name printed neatly on the label. It was not cafeteria food. It was insulated, warm, expensive smelling, the kind of meal people ordered to celebrate promotions. The staff noticed immediately. I felt their eyes like pins, the mix of curiosity and judgment that always followed anything different. I carried it to the break room like contraband. Inside was pasta, salad, bread that still steamed, and a small dessert that tasted like someone cared about details. My throat tightened on the first bite. The comfort hit fast, then the sting. Food was supposed to be something I earned, something I scraped together between rent and Metro cards. This felt like a spotlight. It also felt like a collar, soft leather instead of chain, but still something wrapped around my life. I pictured Damian's calm face, the way solutions appeared before I could argue. Part of me wanted to throw the bag away. Part of me wanted to lick the container clean. Between patients, my mind kept flipping to Lily's schedule. Aftercare pickup, fever check. The small backpack with her emergency inhaler and the extra socks Mrs. June always stuffed in. I realized I had more patience when I was not starving. I spoke softer. I snapped less. That scared me, because it meant his care was working. I did not want to be the kind of mother who needed a dangerous man to function. I just wanted to be present. Near 2 a.m, I skipped my break to help with a kid who would not stop wheezing, and my phone buzzed again, relentless. The message was not romantic. It was logistical, like I had an overseer tracking my pulse. When I finally stepped outside for air, the driver was at the curb, eyes scanning, as if he had been timed to my exhale. I started to wonder how many corners of my life were being watched now, and whether I could ever loosen my shoulders again. On the walk back to the unit, I caught Tasha watching me with that soft concern she hid under humor. I could sense her wanting to ask who was feeding me and why a black SUV kept appearing outside. I pretended nothing had changed, but my chest felt tight. I sent Mrs. June a quick check-in, then watched security footage on a hallway monitor and wondered if my face was already in someone's file. It was almost shift change when Mrs. June finally called, and the tone of her voice was enough to make my blood go cold. She had seen a man she did not recognize near the school gate, asking the staff whether Lily Hart's mother worked nights, asking what time Lily was picked up, acting polite but too interested. The aftercare director had brushed him off, but Mrs. June had watched his car linger before it rolled away. My legs went weak in a way hunger never caused. Suddenly, Damian's escorts and meals were not just about me. They were a wall between my child and someone else's curiosity. I packed my bag, walked toward the garage, and felt the cage tighten with every step. I did not know whether to run from Damian or to beg him to lock the door. Back in Damian's penthouse, the silence hit me harder than any alarm. My shift noise still rang in my ears, but here the city looked muted behind glass. I checked on Lily first, reading Mrs. June's update twice, until my chest loosened. Then I wandered, barefoot, holding my phone like a shield I couldn't drop, even when it felt safe. I moved slowly, afraid to touch anything that cost more than my car. The marble counters were cold under my fingertips. A faint scent of coffee lingered, mixed with that dark cologne I still couldn't forget. In the main room, 2 men stood near the windows, scanning the view like it could hide threats. They nodded at me, respectful, watchful. The study drew me in. It wasn't a trophy room or a flashy office. It was shelves, leather chairs, and soft lamps that made the air feel warmer. I ran my thumb along spines and expected business manuals. Instead, I found novels, philosophy, and a worn book of poems. The idea of him reading at night unsettled me inwardly, quietly. I opened a novel and saw his handwriting in the margins, small and precise. He underlined lines about loyalty, loneliness, and the cost of survival, like he'd been studying my life without meeting me. A pressed subway receipt marked a chapter, ordinary and tender. For a second, I pictured him on a late train, invisible among strangers, carrying secrets too. That softness made the danger sharper. If Damian could be gentle with books, he could be ruthless with people. And both could be true. My thoughts kept snapping back to Lily's face, to the unknown man near her school, to the way threats can wear polite smiles. I told myself I was here to keep my child safe at all. I was turning a page when muffled voices rose from the hallway. Not loud, just urgent enough to cut through the quiet. My spine straightened. The apartment had too many corners for secrets, and every new guard made me feel smaller. I froze, listening, because mothers learn fast that the sound before a storm matters most. Then one word surfaced. Bait. The syllable landed in my chest like ice. My hands went damp, and my mind leapt to Lily, to her school gate, to aftercare sheets. I tasted metal, the way I do before a bad outcome. In that instant, I understood they weren't debating business in the abstract. They were weighing me, and my daughter with me right now. I edged closer, unable to walk away. I couldn't catch every sentence, but the meaning was unmistakable in the tone. Someone believed my presence could lure Cal Russo into a move. They spoke of leverage and pressure points, the cold language of strategy. My stomach turned, because I knew how it feels to be used at work. This was worse. Then Damian's voice cut through, not loud, but absolute. I felt the room tighten around it, like everyone straightened at once. His refusal didn't sound like debate. It sounded like a command backed by consequences. The men shifted, and the suggestion died on the air. Through the silence, I understood one boundary. I was off limits, and he meant it. My anger flared anyway. Being protected did not erase being discussed. I wanted to burst in and remind them I was a nurse and a mother, not a chess piece. But beneath the rage, warmth rose, because Damian shut it down without hesitation. No one had ever treated me like I mattered. The paradox made me dizzy, valued, and vulnerable. I stepped into the doorway before courage ran out. The guards noticed, and the air tightened. Damian turned, and I felt his focus lock on me. I didn't argue with clever words. I let my fear show and my motherhood speak. I was not a pawn. I was Lily's mother, and every risk now belonged to her too in here. Damian answered without raising his voice, but the room shifted as if he'd drawn a line. I felt the message. He would not trade me for advantage, and he would keep Lily out of reach. Then his focus hardened. Cal Russo was not guessing anymore. Cal was digging, using people in schools and records, following my trail backward toward him. Damian's calm turned sharper. Cal had found a thread tied to my past, something I buried under work and silence. He had been asking about a man and a place that made my skin crawl. Then Damian mentioned a detail that stole my breath. A name I never say out loud. A name that could drag me into childhood again. My mouth went dry. My mind raced through boxes I open, memories I keep buried for Lily's sake. Secrets are a luxury when a child is on the line. Cal Russo had found a name I swore I would never speak, and that meant he could weaponize my past. Damian wanted it, and I feared what protection does to threats. I faced Damian and felt the floor shift. The penthouse, the guards, the bills, none of it could keep my past buried if Cal Russo was digging. Lily's safety was now tied to a war I never chose. Damian's look demanded truth, and my throat tightened around the name I refused to speak. Somewhere out there, Cal was sharpening it. The word bait kept ringing in my ears long after the hallway went quiet. I stood in Damian's study with his book open on my palm, but the pages were blank to me now. Cal Russo was not a rumor anymore. He was a hand reaching into my life, into Lily's school, into the soft places I protect with my teeth. My skin felt too tight. I wanted to grab my daughter and vanish back into Queens, back into cramped rooms and familiar struggle. At least poverty was predictable. This was different. This was war learning my name at last. Damian's attention pressed on me like a steady weight, waiting for what Cal had already started digging up. I tried to swallow the truth, to keep it buried where it could not touch Lily, but secrets rot when someone else holds the shovel. My throat closed around the name, the same way it used to close around screams I never let out. I told myself I was safe now, grown, educated, a nurse who could handle anything. Then I remembered I had been a child once. His name was Ray Harker, and saying it felt like bleeding right through me. I never say Ray's name because the memories come with it, not as scenes but as sensations. The smell of cheap aftershave in a hallway. A door that should have been locked. The way my body learned to go still and silent, to become furniture, to survive by disappearing. I learned to smile on command and to laugh at jokes that made my stomach crawl. I learned that adults could be dangerous, and that systems could fail you with paperwork and voices. When the placement changed, no one asked the right questions. I carried it alone, because shame travels light. Motherhood turned that old fear into a blade. When Lily was born, I promised her the world would never get a bite out of her the way it bit me. I chose daycare by safety ratings, walked her to doors myself, memorized each teacher's face. I taught her to shout my name if she ever felt unsure, and I hated that I had to. Every time she ran a fever, my mind raced through worst cases. Not because I'm dramatic, but because I've seen how help arrives late. My past matters now because Cal can use it to reach her. When I finally let the name sit between us, Damian's face changed in a way I felt more than saw. Something ancient and ruthless rose, then got locked behind his eyes. He told me, in that blunt, controlled way of his, that Ray Harker had already been handled. The phrase sounded clinical, but my body understood the meaning. Ray would never touch another child. There were no details, only certainty. My stomach lurched as if I'd been punched. I had wanted justice for years. Yet hearing it delivered by a man like Damian made my skin prickle with fear anyway. Relief came next, unwanted and fast, like a gasp after being held underwater. I hated myself for it. I imagined the foster kid I used to be, the one who learned not to ask adults for anything, and I wanted to apologize to her. Then I imagined Lily, and the apology turned into gratitude that hurt. Ray's shadow had followed me into motherhood, into every lock I checked twice. Now it was gone, but the way it disappeared mattered. I was being protected by violence I couldn't see, and that meant I might be living inside someone else's rules forever, Damian explained. Through fragments and impressions I pieced together how Cal Russo was spreading a story that he had gone soft. Cal wanted the crews to believe Damian was compromised, ruled by emotion, distracted by a woman and her kid. The cruelty of it made my hands shake. Cal didn't need to hurt me to hurt Damian. He just needed to point at me like proof of weakness. And once Lily's name entered that game, there was no corner left. I saw it. My past was ammunition. My motherhood was leverage. And my existence had accelerated a conflict I understood. My instinct was to run. I pictured packing Lily's backpack, telling Mrs. June we were taking a trip, vanishing somewhere no one knew our names. I could go back to scraping by. I could handle hunger. I could not handle my child being hunted. I told myself leaving Damian would cut the thread Cal was pulling. But even as I formed the plan, I knew Cal would not stop just because I moved. He would follow weakness wherever it went. Damian's world had touched mine, paid my debts, washed my clothes, placed guards in my orbit. I knew that now. Damian's devotion flipped my plan. In the way he stood, and in how guards shifted to his will, I sensed he would lose everything before he let Cal Russo reach Lily. The idea should have scared me, but it steadied me too. He wasn't begging for my trust. He was offering certainty. Calls went out. Men moved. Doors locked. The penthouse turned into a command center. I watched him become storm and shelter, and I understood the new direction. No more hiding. No more defense. Damian meant to end this soon, on his terms, before Cal could touch my child. At 12:10 a.m., the penthouse stopped feeling like a home and became a countdown. Phones glowed in palms. Men moved with soft shoes and hard faces. I sat rigid on the sofa, still in Damian's shirt, with my scrubs folded beside me like a reminder of the normal life I was failing to reach. My first thought was Lily. My second was how far away she felt, even though she was only a few train stops from Manhattan's skyline. Mrs. June Parker had taken Lily for the night, and I'd watched my daughter's small body sink into her old couch cushions with a feverish sigh before the driver brought me back here. Mrs. June's last message sat on my lock screen. Lily asleep, fever easing, door latched. I kept reading it like repetition could guarantee morning. I had promised Lily I would always come back. Tonight that promise felt like a dare. Rafe crews turned the penthouse into a quiet machine. I didn't hear orders so much as I sensed them in the way men appeared, checked the terrace, and vanished again. Extra vehicles were called. Radios murmured low. Damian stayed close to me without hovering, his presence heavy and controlled, like he was restraining something violent behind his ribs. Cal Russo had demanded a meeting, and Damian had chosen to end the pressure instead of surviving it. I tried to argue myself into staying behind. Pride insisted I was a liability. Motherhood insisted I needed to watch, to know, to make sure I wasn't leaving Lily's fate in anyone else's hands. Damian's answer came through his actions. He allowed me into the convoy, but locked me into safety. I would ride with him, not because I was brave, but because he refused to let me become a loose thread. I would stay inside the SUV, guarded and sealed, because Lily needed a mother who returned more than she needed a woman who proved a point. The convoy slid out into the city like a shadow line. Queen streets gave way to Brooklyn industrial blocks, and the streetlights passed in slow beats that matched my pulse. The cabin smelled of leather, faint coffee, and Damian's cologne, dark enough to cut through my fear. His hand covered mine, firm and steady, not romantic, just anchoring me to the present. My mind kept trying to sprint ahead, If I died, Lily would wake up calling for me. If Damian died, Cal would tear open a power vacuum and my child would be exposed to it. I told myself to breathe, to stay a nurse, to focus on what I could control, my body, my choices, my silence. The warehouse waited under sodium lamps that made everything look bruised and unreal. Cold air seeped through the seams of the car when the convoy slowed, and I saw silhouettes holding positions at the edges of the lot. Engines idled, metal echoed somewhere inside the building, a hollow sound that made my teeth ache. Rafe's presence moved around us in disciplined arcs, a perimeter I felt rather than saw. The locks clicked again, heavy and final, and I stayed in the back seat with my palms pressed to my thighs, forcing myself not to shake. Damian stepped out alone, posture calm in a way that made everyone else look tense. I watched him cross open ground toward the warehouse entrance, and time thickened into something I could barely swallow. Seconds crawled. My world narrowed to what I could hear. A metal door groaning, muffled voices rising and falling, then a sharp crack that split the night. More cracks followed, too fast to count. The SUV rocked slightly as guards moved, and adrenaline flooded my mouth with a bitter taste. I leaned forward, fighting the urge to fling the door open and run after him. Light flared from the warehouse windows and a shock of heat pushed outward. The sound arrived a beat later, a deep thud that rattled the glass in my ribs. Smoke rolled into the lot, gray under the lamps. Shadows sprinted. Radios crackled. I felt trapped and furious, like the car had become a cage I'd chosen. Every part of me wanted to break the rule. Then Lily's face flashed in my mind. Not dramatic, just real. And I forced myself to stay seated. Being reckless for love was optional. Being alive for my child was not. Minutes stretched until they stopped making sense. I gripped my phone, then realized there was no call that would undo what was happening. Through the smoke, a figure emerged, and my heart stalled because I couldn't tell if it was Damian. Then he stepped into the sodium light, shirt torn, shoulders squared, still moving with relentless control. He dragged Cal Russo by the collar like a problem finally solved. Cal sagged, alive but defeated, and the message was unmistakable even from behind glass. The power play was over. The door opened, and cold air rushed in. Damian reached me fast, hands on my face, then around my shoulders, pulling me close until my breath returned. I clung to him, shaking with relief so hard my knees threatened to fold. The night smelled like smoke and winter, but his arms felt solid, a shelter I couldn't deny. As the convoy turned away and the warehouse shrank behind us, distant sirens wailed somewhere in the city. My adrenaline began to drain, leaving one question rising with the road ahead. After tonight, what does safe look like for me and Lily? And how do I build it without losing myself? I rested my forehead on the glass and pictured Lily's smile, hoping I could still earn it. 3 months later, morning light poured across the penthouse windows, softening New York into something almost kind. The air smelled like coffee and toasted bread instead of antiseptic and panic. I woke without my shoulders clenched, and that alone felt like a miracle I'd earned. Lily's laugh drifted from the kitchen, bright and unforced. She sat at the island in pajamas covered in little suns, swinging her feet while she colored. Her backpack waited by the door, packed for school. The fever that scared me that first night with Damian was long gone. Her cheeks looked healthy again, and her eyes had that spark that tells you a kid feels safe. Mrs. June Parker was there too, humming while she buttered toast like she'd been part of this home forever. She still lived in Queens, but she came over most mornings now. She had become our steady bridge between my old life and this new one, and when she patted my arm it came with a smile instead of worry. Damian moved around them with a careful patience I didn't know he owned. He was still watchful, still the sort of man who could turn a room silent with a glance. The difference was that he'd learned how to lower himself to Lily's height, how to listen to a story about a classroom goldfish, as if it mattered. I could feel the guards outside the door, the invisible perimeter that never truly disappeared. But inside the kitchen he kept his hands gentle. He wasn't trying to become a different person. He was choosing to be softer with us. That choice didn't erase the past. Some nights I still woke with my heart racing, the warehouse echoing in my head. Damian would already be awake, sitting in the dark like he was standing watch over my sleep. He never demanded gratitude. He just stayed present until my breathing slowed. I used to think love meant disappearing. The foster system taught me that. Then motherhood tried to undo it. Then the ER finished the lesson by grinding me into a person who survived on grit and silence. Damian's world could have erased me in a different way, with money and protection so thick I forgot how to move on my own. I fought that. He let me fight it. That morning, he set an envelope on the table beside my mug. Thick paper, official seal, the kind of thing that usually arrives after months of applications and polite rejection emails. He didn't push it toward me. He just watched my face like he was making room for whatever I chose, while Mrs. June kept Lily busy with strawberries. Inside the envelope was an offer letter from Hudson Harbor Medical Network, a hospital system that looked like a dream compared to my old Queen's ER. The title made my stomach flip. Director of Emergency Nursing and Patient Safety Lead. The salary line said $180,000, plus benefits that made my nurse brain do quick math and then stop. Stunned. The role promised authority, staffing control, and a pathway to make sure no nurse had to beg for a break or risk a write-up for needing to pick up her child. My first reaction was disbelief, then a flare of anger, then a rush of joy that scared me. Joy can be taken. Gifts can be traps. I have lived enough life to know that. Then I looked at Lily, licking jam from her thumb, and I felt the truth settle. I didn't want this job because Damian could open doors. I wanted it because I was done being invisible, because I knew what safe should look like inside an ER, not just inside a penthouse. Because Lily deserved a mother who came home with energy left, not a mother who collapsed in the doorway. Damian's eyes stayed on me, steady, and I felt the boundary we'd built together. This had to be my yes, my signature, my decision. He could protect us, but he could not live my life for me. The fact that he understood that he accepted it, was the real upgrade. 3 months ago, I was begging the universe for 1 second of comfort in a hospital waiting room. Now I had a home where my child laughed, a neighbor who felt like family, and a future that belonged to me. If you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever carried everything alone, remember this. Being loved should not erase your voice. It should help you hear it. She asked me to check her spelling list, and I did it without glancing at my phone every 30 seconds. That used to be my habit, always waiting for the next crisis. Now I could breathe, pack lunch, and walk her to the elevator without rushing. Down the hall, a guard nodded, and I remembered the world was still sharp. Damian still took late calls behind closed doors, still carried storms I would never fully name, but he kept them outside Lily's bedtime, outside her cartoons and her tiny shoes by the door. I learned that safety is not the absence of danger. It is choosing what reaches your child and what never will. If this story stayed with you, please like, share, and comment. Tell me about a moment you finally felt seen, or a time you chose yourself and your future.